Today is May 10th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It's a thrill, honor, and joy to be here with you today as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Today out of the Big Book, we're going to read from the core text, We Agnostics, Chapter 4, pages 50 and 51. And now the personal stories, we're going to be reading the Perpetual Quest, pages 391 through 394. And finally, out of the 12 and 12, we will be reading a little bit more out of tradition number 3, pages 139 and part of 140. So with all that, my friends, hope you're doing well this morning. We've been given a brand new set of 24 hours. And if we woke up sober today, life is good. So let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. All right, my friends. So if you recall from yesterday's reading, we were talking about We Agnostics was talking about some of the prejudice that people may have regarding spiritual matters, regarding God and certain religions. I mean, we all have different backgrounds, and all this section was really talking about yesterday was just keep that open mind. But one thing in particular they talked about was how we often look at other people that are in the church or whatever, and we may make excuses. And oftentimes we look at other people and we go, see, there is nothing to this faith stuff. So it's going to build on that on page 50. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of the trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has, in each case, accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statement put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seemingly futility of existence, they showed the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important factor of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums in which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet, in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. We ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material. Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all the efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds have proved that man can never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. All right, some great stuff there. We'll come back to this a little later. All right, and if you recall from yesterday, we were journeying through the Perpetual quest, and our friend here is in law school, and she's drinking with her husband, and things are going pretty good so far. However, as she alluded to at the very beginning, it doesn't last very long, and we're going to see her alcoholism unfortunately turn pretty radically here in just a minute. So we're going to be reading page 391 through 394. Unfortunately, by the time we thought it was time to have a real life and maybe start a family, the marriage disintegrated. I was then 28 years old, getting divorced, drinking all the time, and seeing a psychiatrist 3 times a week, trying to solve my problem, whatever it was. I thought I found part of the answer when I stumbled into a private controlled drinking program, which helped me, during the initial 30-day mandatory period of abstinence, to hook a very large rug, row by row, well into many late nights. "One more row," I kept saying, gritting my teeth against the drink. My period of abstinence also helped me get a better job in the corporate world, away from all those hard-drinking criminal lawyers, and a new 3-story, 4-bedroom house. Just what every single woman needs. It helped me to quit the psychiatrist. During this abstinence, I also got out of a sick relationship which produced the violence of my childhood. Incredibly, I did not connect the improved manageability of my life in the short period of abstinence to the absence of booze. It didn't matter in the long run, because unfortunately, I started to get drunk again. I recall being fixated on that first glass of wine I was allowed to drink the day that my coach informed me that I was ready to start drinking in a controlled fashion. My tongue was almost hanging out. Many drunks later, I tried everything else that I could think of, that I could find. More therapy, different psychiatrists. It was always to be the next one who would solve my problem. Biofeedback, relaxation exercises, and abuse. Lots of self-help books from Freud and Jung. To every current fad that was published or taught. All to no avail, of course, because I'd always end up drunk. Came the day when I realized that I couldn't keep dragging myself off to work in the morning and spending half of the energy of every day concealing the fact that I was barely a functioning drunk. I would go home to drink until I passed out, come to in the middle of the night terrified, listen to the radio, and get worldwide telephonitis, finally dozing off at dawn, just in time to be awakened by the alarm and start the process all over again. I gave up on relationships of any significance, saw my friends less, and stopped committing myself to most social occasions because I could never count on being sober. More and more, I just worked and went home to drink, and the drink was starting to outstrip the working. One day I was so hungover at lunchtime I called a friend and had a little cry. "I've tried everything and nothing works," I said, reciting my litany of doctors and different therapies. I did not remember that 13 years earlier, when I was 21 years old, I had attended a few meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous after waking up one morning not knowing where I was. I had just started law school and was terrified most of the time. So I went on a binge to quell the fear, which only got worse. I have no idea what made me go to AA but way back then. But there were no young people at the meetings, and the people kept marveling at how young and fresh I looked. No one at AA said that when I came back 13 years later. My friend suggested that we contact a man she knew who was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I agreed to call him. "Perhaps he can call you," she said helpfully, which was the key because by that night, I was just fine and didn't need any outside help aside from a drink or two. But he kept phoning and bothering me about going to a meeting. When he told me he went to AA meetings 3 or 4 times a week, I thought, poor man, he has nothing better to do? What a boring life it must be for him, running around to AA meetings with nothing to drink. Boring indeed. No bouncing off walls, no falling down stairs, no regular trips to the hospital emergency rooms, no lost cars, and on and on. My first meeting back at AA was on an unseasonably hot June night, but there was not a cool drink in sight in that church basement. The smoke could have choked a horse. Today it's much improved. And a fanatical woman with smiling bright eyes eagerly explained to me that they had this important book that I should buy. Thinking that they were doing the book promotion because they needed the money, I said firmly, "I'll give you the money, but I don't want your book." Which about sums up my attitude and explains why, for the first few months, I continued to get drunk in spite of dragging my body to meetings every few days. I'd stare at the large vodka bottle in my kitchen cupboard and say, "You won't get me." But it did. I always lost a battle and ended up drunk. My last hangover was on a Friday before a long summer weekend. I had struggled through the day, feeling small and hopeless, hiding the trembling of my hands when I had to sign the documents, and desperately working to wrap my tongue around words during meetings. Later that Friday night, after an agonizingly long workday, I was dragging myself up the deserted street, thinking that the whole world, except for me, had some place to go on that long weekend. And what's more, they all had someone to go with. The first difference between that night and all the others was that I did not immediately go directly to a bar to get lubricated or home with my regular giant of a weekend supply of booze. Instead, I went to my club to swim, where strangely enough, I also did not drink. I was so hungover that I had to give up trying to swim and instead wrapped myself in a bathrobe and sat in a dark corner of the locker room lounge for 2 hours, feeling desperately sorry for myself. I don't know what happened during those 2 hours, but close to 8 o'clock, I leaped up, jumped into my clothes, and raced off to a meeting that I had no intention of attending. It was a bit like getting a rap on the head with an invisible hammer and having my brain flipped over, because the meeting seemed to be as radically different from the last time I'd been there. The people looked animatedly alive. The weirdos who had been attending before were absent that night, and the book on display actually looked interesting. I bought that book, Alcoholics Anonymous, listened intently, and then, for the first time, I went for coffee with those people and listened some more. Late that night at home, there was a presence in the room with me, even though I lived alone. The next morning, I knew I didn't have to drink. That night, I went to a step meeting where they discussed Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I actually talked about God, the one who had abandoned me when I was very little, very frightened, and very hurt. In the weeks and months that followed, I did everything that was suggested to me. I went to a meeting every day, read the books and literature. I got a sponsor who told me to have a quiet time every morning and try to pray and meditate, or at least sit still for a few minutes before racing off for the day. Of not having contempt for anything prior to investigation, I tried to keep an open mind, and no matter what anyone said and how stupid I thought it was, that probably saved my life. All right, great stuff here, guys. We'll come back to this in just a minute. And finally, we are on tradition number 3 from the 12 and 12, which is the only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop drinking. So today we're going to read the bottom of page 139 to the top of page 140. A member gives us a vivid glimpse of those days. At one time, he says, every AA group had many membership rules. Everybody was scared witless that something or somebody would capsize the boat and dump us all back into the drink. Our foundation office asked each group to send in lists of protective regulations. The total list was a mile long. If all those rules had been in effect everywhere, nobody could have possibly joined AA at all. So great was the sum of our anxiety and fear. We were resolved to admit nobody to AA, but that hypothetical class of people who were termed pure alcoholics. Except for their guzzling and the unfortunate results thereof, they could have no other complications. So beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out. Yes, sir, we'd cater only to pure and respectable alcoholics. Any others would surely destroy us. Besides, if we took in those odd ones, what would decent people say about us? We built a fine mesh fence right around AA. All right, so all I can say is thank goodness things are a lot different nowadays. Or every fellowship that I've attended has been all-inclusive. You know, if you have a desire to stop drinking, you're welcome. So just grateful that it's a lot more inclusive now than those early days. And I think that's why one of the reasons why these 12 and 12s, why the 12 and 12 was written in the 50s, to kind of amend some of the exclusive clubs that were being established, calling themselves as AA. And out of We Agnostics on page 51, I think it's just saying that look at the evidence around us. You know, when we see people who are sober, when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. So are all these people crazy? You know, the evidence is right before us. You know, when we see this change, especially when we see this change in the people around us in the fellowships. I know for me, when I look around the room and I see people that have 30 years of sobriety, 40 years of sobriety, maybe even 50 years of sobriety, and they all have a spiritual belief in a power greater than themselves. To me, that's evidence that, okay, there might be something to this. And they seem happy. One, it attracts me. And two, there might be something to this whole spiritual angle. I think what these last few pages are really getting at is to discard these fixed ideas and have an open mind. It's really trying to capitalize on that idea of having an open mind going into this. And, on the top of page 50, I'm guilty of saying, looking at a lot of people from church and going, oh, see, there's, look at that guy. He messed up. Or, there's nothing to this whole faith thing. Never mind the fact that there were a lot of good people out there trying to do the right thing, helping a lot of people. Not perfect, but trying to do the right thing. Acting on their faith, living out their faith, and trying to help a lot of people. I didn't want to look at them. I was in denial there. I had a closed mind about that. So that's what this chapter made me think of. And then finally we see that our friend here in the Perpetual Quest, her life's getting unmanageable. My heart goes out to her. She ends up getting a divorce. She's starting to drink alone a lot. She's trying all these different ways to isolate herself, and she's starting to drink for oblivion every single day. Now, she must have thought she might have had a problem a long time ago because she did go to AA before, way back when she was younger. And she makes the point of saying, oh, they comment on how young I was and how fresh I was. And then she puts in the parentheses, no one at AA said that when I came back 13 years later. So 13 more years, I guess, of experimenting, it can be hard on a person. And thankfully, we see that, she has some friends in her life that recommend that she go to AA again. And I like that the one friend says, no, you know what? I'll have our AA friend call you. You don't call him, he'll call you. And sure enough, he calls over and over and invites her to a meeting. So she starts going and, it doesn't happen right off the bat. She doesn't necessarily get it right off the bat. She's like, I don't want your stinking book. Here's your money. But meanwhile, she comes home and she's saying to, her bottles of vodka, "You're not going to get me." And they get her every time. But I love this last part that we just read. My last hangover was on a Friday before a long summer weekend. Instead of going right home to drink or instead of going to the bar, she decides to go for a swim. But when she gets there, she's too sick to swim. And as she's sitting there beside the pool, or I guess was in the locker room, feeling sorry for herself, something happens to her. And this sounds almost spiritual. It's pretty amazing. She goes, "You know what? I need to go to a meeting." She goes to a meeting. It says right here, it was a bit like getting a rap on the head with an invisible hammer and having my brain flip over, because the meeting had seemed to be radically different from the last time I'd been there. All of a sudden, she's there at the meeting. She's looking at the people differently. The weirdos who had been attending before were absent that night. She buys the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And then she went for coffee with some of the people after the meeting. So she plugs in. She finally gets involved. She's being active here, not a passive participant. And late that night at home, there was a presence in the room with me, even though I lived alone. The next morning, I didn't have to drink. That night, I went to a step meeting where they discussed step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And I actually talked about God, the one who abandoned me when I was very little, very frightened and very hurt. In the weeks and months that followed, I did everything that was suggested to me, so now she's being active again. And she says right here at the bottom, "I tried to keep an open mind no matter what anyone said and how stupid I thought it was. And that probably saved my life." Going back to what we just read today of keeping that open mind, we can see the miracle is happening in our friend's life here. And it truly is amazing to see how it works. So with all that, my friends, if you are sober today, you're a miracle. You're an absolute miracle. And if we are given another set of 24 hours, I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.